I was sitting in the school parking lot at 3:14 on a Wednesday afternoon when I realized I had been sitting in this exact spot, at this exact time, for 437 consecutive school days. I know the number because I had been tracking it. Not obsessively, I want to be clear about that. I tracked it the way you track anything that has become so woven into your schedule that you stop questioning whether it should be there. My phone calendar said Millbrook pickup every weekday at 3 p.m. with a 15-minute travel buffer built in, and every afternoon I closed my laptop and I drove 12 minutes across town, and I pulled into the left lane of the pickup loop, and I waited for my sister's 3 children to come through the double doors. Their names were Marcus, 7 years old, gap-toothed, deeply serious about his shoelaces, and Lily, who is 9, and then Petra, who is 11 and the oldest, and sometimes, on hard days, the one who checked to make sure I was doing all right before she climbed into the back seat. I am Rosalind Galloway. I am 34 years old. I work as a licensed occupational therapist at a pediatric rehabilitation clinic on the north side of the city, in a low brick building with a mural on the east wall that the kids in our waiting room have been adding to for 3 years. I have a small apartment on Covington Street with a copper kettle on the stove and a cat named Bernard, who sheds on everything I own. I have a life. I want to be specific about that because what I am about to tell you will make more sense if you understand that I was not a woman with nothing going on. I was just a woman who had gotten very good at making herself invisible. My sister Diane is 3 years older than me, which means she is 37, and she has been 3 years ahead of me in everything our family considered important since before I could walk. She married first. She bought a house first. She had children first. She did all of it on what her mother called Diane's schedule, which was a phrase my mother used the way some people use a blessing, as if the schedule itself were sacred, and anyone who disrupted it was committing something close to a sin. Diane's husband, Greg, worked in construction project management and traveled Monday through Thursday most weeks, which meant that from Sunday night until Friday afternoon, Diane was effectively a single parent to 3 children under the age of 12, and she had been that way for most of their marriage, and she had made very clear to everyone in our family that this was hard, and she deserved credit for it. I don't disagree. Parenting alone 4 days a week is exhausting. I watched it up close for 2 years. I know what it costs. What I didn't know, until a Tuesday in March, was what she had been telling her friends it cost her. When I first started picking up the kids, I offered because Diane mentioned the after-school program had a 6-week waitlist, and the backup sitter had canceled. I lived 12 minutes away. I drove past Millbrook Elementary anyway on my way home from the clinic. I said I can do this week while you sort something out. That was 2 years and 4 months ago. The something never got sorted. I never stopped. In the beginning, Diane brought me coffee sometimes on Fridays. She texted thank you messages for the first 3 months. Then the thank yous became assumed, and then the coffee stopped, and then the arrangement simply became the infrastructure of her life the way electricity becomes the infrastructure of a house. You don't thank your walls for holding the roof up. You only notice them when they crack. My mother knew about the arrangement and approved of it the way she approved of most things I did for Diane, quietly, without acknowledgement, and with a slight air of expectation that I would continue. Once, early on, she said, "This is good for you, Rosalind. You need to stay connected to family." As if driving across town every weekday to collect someone else's children were a gift I was receiving rather than a service I was providing. I want to be honest, I loved those kids. I love them still. Petra used to draw me small pencil sketches in the back seat on the ride home, birds mostly, with very serious wings. Lily once asked me to explain what occupational therapists actually do, and when I told her we help people do the things that matter to them when something has made that hard, she was quiet for a moment and then said, "So, you help people get their life back?" I said that was exactly right, and she nodded like she'd expected that answer. Marcus fell asleep in my backseat twice, and I sat in Diane's driveway for 20 minutes both times because I couldn't bring myself to wake him up. I am telling you all of this so you understand something clearly. When I stopped showing up, it was not because I had stopped caring about those children. It was because of what I heard on a Tuesday in March in a corner booth at the diner on Alderman Street from the only person in my life who thought I deserved to know. My friend Kezia works in the billing department at a clinic 3 blocks from mine. We have lunch together most Thursdays at the diner on Alderman Street, the one with the red vinyl booths and the soup that comes in mugs instead of bowls, and she is one of the 3 people in my life I would describe as someone who actually sees me clearly. On the Tuesday in question, Kezia texted me at 11:47 a.m. The text said, "Hey, are you free for lunch today instead of Thursday? Need to tell you something in person. Don't panic, you're not in trouble. Just need to tell you." I went. We sat across from each other in the corner booth. She ordered the lentil soup and I ordered the egg salad on rye, and she waited until the food came before she said anything. That was how I knew it was going to be something I didn't want to hear. She said she had been at a birthday dinner the previous Saturday for a mutual acquaintance named Paula, who is not close to either of us, but moved in the same general orbit. Diane had been at that dinner. They had been seated near each other, and the conversation had moved the way conversations at birthday dinners do, and someone had asked Diane how she managed everything with Greg traveling so much, and Diane had said, and Kezia quoted her directly because Kezia is precise and she knew I would want the exact words, "Honestly, my sister picks up the kids. She doesn't have much going on anyway. It works out for both of us. She doesn't have much going on anyway." She had said it lightly. The way you say the sun rose this morning. As a fact so obvious it requires no examination. Kezia reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know if I should tell you. I decided you deserve to know." I said, "Thank you." I meant it completely. I finished my egg salad on rye. I did not cry. I did not call Diane. I drove back to the clinic and I saw 4 patients that afternoon. The last one was a 9-year-old named Tobias who had been working with me for 6 weeks on fine motor coordination after a nerve injury, and that afternoon he buttoned a shirt by himself for the first time, all 5 buttons, and looked up at me with an expression I can only describe as astonished at himself. I told him he had done something genuinely hard, and he should be proud of it. I meant that too. I held everything else in the carefully sealed compartment I had been trained since childhood to maintain, the one my family had helped me construct without ever naming it. That evening, at 6:32 p.m., I opened my phone calendar. I opened the recurring event that said Millbrook pickup every weekday from 3 to 3:45 p.m. I looked at it for a moment. 437 instances. Forward into the indefinite future, every weekday, no end date. I tapped at it. I scrolled to the delete option. The confirmation asked, "Delete this and all following events?" I said yes. I set the phone down on the counter beside the copper kettle, and I put the kettle on, and I stood in my kitchen while the water came to a boil, and I listened to Bernard complaining from the hallway about his dinner being late, and I fed him, and I made my tea, and I sat down, and I breathed. I did not call Diane that night. I did not the next morning. I let the silence do what silence is sometimes the only thing that can. I want to tell you about the 3 days before that Friday because the 3 days matter in ways I didn't fully understand until much later. I thought about calling Diane. I want to be honest that I thought about it, that there was a version of me who believed the right thing was to have a conversation. To say, "I heard what you told Paula's table. I need you to understand what that sounded like." To give her a chance to explain or apologize or, at minimum, to look me in the face and account for the words. But I had been having conversations with Diane my whole life. Careful conversations in which I raised something that had hurt me and she told me I was being sensitive, or misunderstanding, or not appreciating what she dealt with, or making everything about myself. Every time I brought something to Diane, I left the conversation feeling like the problem was not the thing that had happened, but that I had mentioned it. I had learned, at great cost and over many years, that some people will only understand the weight of something when they are asked to lift it themselves. So on Thursday morning, I sent her a text. I was precise about it. I did not explain. I did not apologize. I wrote, "Hey, just flagging, I have some scheduling changes coming up this week. Starting tomorrow, I won't be able to do the pickup run. You'll want to arrange coverage." 14 words beyond the opener. She read it at 9:18 a.m. and did not respond. Thursday afternoon, I pulled into the school loop for the last time. Lily ran out first and Petra second and Marcus last as always, because Marcus stopped by the door to tie his shoelaces even though he had been tying them for over a year and still took 45 seconds each time. Lily talked the whole ride home about a project on the water cycle. She had very specific feelings about cumulus clouds. Petra asked if I was going to be at her soccer game Saturday. I said I didn't know yet. That was the truest thing I'd said all day. At Diane's driveway, I hugged all three of them. I told Petra good luck with the game. I told Lily the water cycle project sounded impressive. I told Marcus his shoes looked like they were holding on strong. He looked down at them seriously, confirming this, and said, "They are." I drove home. I made Earl Grey tea from the tin with the dent on the lid. I sat at my kitchen table with both hands around the mug, and I looked out the window at the streetlight coming on over Covington Street, and I let myself feel the full weight of what 2 years of showing up had been worth in the one place where that calculation was honest. My own chest. It was a number I had been avoiding for a long time. Friday came. I was at my desk at the clinic. The morning moved through its ordinary shapes. 2 early sessions, a team check-in, the soft shuffle of the waiting room, Tobias and his mother arriving at 1:30 for his follow-up, and him showing me he could now button the top button too, the small one, the hard one, and me telling him that was the one that counted. At 3 p.m. I did not move. I kept working. I did not close my laptop. I did not pick up my bag. I sat in my office with the afternoon light coming through the east-facing window at a low angle, and at 3:18 my phone buzzed on my desk. "Diane, where are you?" I turned the phone face down. 3:26, Rosalind. "The kids are waiting." 3:31. "I don't understand what's happening. I told you I needed coverage." I want to be honest about what happened in my body during those minutes, because the version of this story that feels clean, in which I sat calmly and felt nothing, in which the boundary was effortless, in which I was simply serene, is not the true version. The true version is that I sat at my desk with the phone face down and my hands flat on the surface, and I counted my own breathing the way I teach patients to do, when the thing they most want to avoid has taken on a physical presence in the room. 4 seconds in. Hold for 4. 4 out. I do this with children who are frightened of the exercises that will help them. I was using it now for myself. Outside my window, the clinic parking lot was bright with late afternoon March light. A red sedan was parked at an angle. A woman I didn't know was lifting a child into a car seat with the practiced ease of someone who had done it 10,000 times. The ordinary world continued. It had no idea what was happening at Millbrook Elementary, 12 minutes away, where 3 children were standing in the pickup loop watching cars they didn't recognize pull through. At 3:47, a number I didn't have saved. "This is Greg. Diane says you're not picking up the kids?" "I'm 3 hours out. What's going on?" I set the phone down. I did not answer Greg. I kept counting. 4 in. 4 hold. 4 out. At 4:03, Diane reached their neighbor Sandra, who had 2 children at the same school and had helped out in small ways before. Sandra collected Marcus, Lily, and Petra. They were fine. The system improvised. I learned this later, and I want you to know that the children being fine mattered to me, that even in the middle of what I was doing, I was not indifferent to where they ended up. I simply was not going to be the one to make sure of it anymore. I sat at my desk until 5:30. Then I packed my bag and locked my office and drove home and fed Bernard and stood at my kitchen counter and ate pasta with olive oil and garlic I made in 17 minutes, standing up because sometimes you just need to stand somewhere quietly and feed yourself something warm and simple and your own. Saturday morning, 7 calls before I'd had coffee. Diane's name on the screen, each one going to voicemail, my phone sitting by the copper kettle like a thing I decided not to touch. I let them all go. At 10:14 she texted, "I don't understand what I did. Please tell me what I did." I read it. I set the phone down. I took Bernard outside onto the small balcony off my kitchen, and I sat in the folding chair I keep there, and I held him, and I looked at the street below, and I thought about what it meant that she genuinely didn't know. That the question was real. That she was not performing confusion. She actually could not locate the thing she had done, because to her, what she had said at Paula's table was simply a fact she had spoken aloud, a neutral description of a person she thought she understood. She doesn't have much going on anyway. She hadn't said it to wound me. She had said it because it was what she believed. And what she believed was the wound. On Sunday, for more calls and 2 texts. The text said variations of the same thing. She was confused. She needed me to talk to her. The kids were asking where I was. I did not answer any of them. I cleaned my apartment. I did a load of laundry. I sat with the leather-bound appointment book I keep by my bed, and I made a list of the things I wanted to do with my Fridays now that they were mine again. I had not had a free Friday afternoon in 2 years and 4 months, and I could not immediately think of what I wanted to do with one, and that gap, the blankness where my own desire should have been, told me more than anything Diane had said at that dinner. The following week, word reached my mother. She called at 6:48 p.m. on a Monday. I let it go to voicemail and listened to it while sitting on my couch with Bernard on my lap. My mother's voice said, "Rosalind, Diane tells me you've stopped picking up the children without any explanation. I don't understand what you're hoping to accomplish. Call me back. This is hurting everyone, and you're not explaining yourself. You're not explaining yourself." As if my labor had required no explanation, but its absence required immediate justification. I replayed the message twice. I put the phone down. Bernard put his chin on my knee, and I sat there in the quiet of my apartment with the streetlight coming through the curtains, and I thought about that sentence for a long time. I had explained myself, actually. Every afternoon for 437 days, I had explained myself. I had pulled into that parking lot, and I had waited in that loop, and I had buckled 3 children into my back seat and driven them across town, and made sure they had a snack, and asked about their days, and listened and shown up, and shown up, and shown up. That was my explanation. It just wasn't in words, and my family had only ever been equipped to read words. I did not call my mother back that night. On the 8th day, a Thursday morning, Diane called 29 times before 9 a.m. I know the exact number because I was awake for all of them. I had been awake since 5:50, which is not unusual for me. I am a light sleeper and my clinic days start early, and I have never been someone who stays in bed once the morning arrives. I was sitting at my kitchen table at 6:31 with my first coffee when the calls began. I watched them come in, each one going to voicemail, each one adding to the count on the missed call badge on my screen. I did not turn the phone over. I watched it the way you watch something you've decided not to flinch at. Call 7 came in at 7:04. Call 14 at 7:22. Call 20 at 7:54. I got up between calls and refilled my coffee and checked on the copper kettle and fed Bernard his breakfast and rinsed my mug and stood at the window above Covington Street where the morning was arriving in long gray strips between the buildings across the road. Call 29 came in at 8:47. After that, 11 minutes of silence. Then a text. I had to hire someone. $740 a week. I cannot afford this. You could have just talked to me. I looked at that number for a long time. $740 a week. For 2 years and 4 months, I had provided this same service, 12 minutes each way, 45 minutes of my afternoon, 5 days a week for 137 school days for $0. Not because I had agreed to be paid and was underpaid, because the arrangement had never once been framed as something with a value that could be measured. It was just what I did. It was just who I was. It was just Rosalind, who doesn't have much going on anyway. $740 a week was the market price of invisible labor. The market had located it inside of 8 days. I set the phone down by the copper kettle. I stood in my kitchen in the morning quiet with that number sitting in me like something finally named. Not satisfaction. I want to be precise about this. Not triumph. Something closer to recognition. The kind that arrives when you have been right about something for a very long time and the evidence finally agrees with you out loud. I got dressed. I drove to work. I pulled into the clinic parking lot at 8:58 and gathered my bag and my coffee, and I walked into the building where a 9-year-old was waiting to show me what his hands could do now. I thought, this is what I have going on. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. After the 29 calls and the $740 text, Diane went silent for 6 days. My mother called twice more in the first week, and I let both go to voicemail and listened to them later, standing in my kitchen, and they said the same things in slightly different configurations, that I was being difficult, that family doesn't do this to each other, that she didn't understand what I was hoping to prove. I did not return either call. Kezia and I had lunch that Thursday, as usual. She told me that Paula, the mutual acquaintance from the birthday dinner, the one who had apparently been seated close enough to hear exactly what Diane said, had reached out to ask if I was all right. Not in the way people ask when they are gathering information. In the way people ask when they are managing a conscience. Paula said she hadn't realized, when she heard it said at the table, that it would land the way it apparently had. Kezia told her I was fine. Kezia told me she'd said it in a way that made clear fine meant handling it, not unaffected. In the second week, Diane sent 2 texts on different days. The first one said, "The kids are asking for you." The second one said, "Petra cried after soccer." I read both of them, and I felt them the way you feel something that is true and painful, and also not your responsibility to immediately fix. I did not respond. I thought about Petra a great deal that week. I thought about her drawing birds with serious wings in my back seat. I thought about the way she had always asked if I was okay before she got out of the car, as if she had already learned, at 11 years old, to check on the person everyone else was taking for granted. I wrote her a card, a real one, with a stamp. I said I missed seeing her and Marcus and Lily, and that I hoped the soccer game went well, and that I was proud of the kind of person she was becoming. I mailed it to Diane's address. I did not hear back. I didn't expect to. It wasn't that kind of card. In the third week, my mother called, and I answered. I had decided to answer. Not because I was ready to be forgiven for something I had not done, but because there was a version of this conversation that needed to happen, and avoiding it indefinitely was its own kind of shrinking. She said she didn't understand my behavior. I told her, clearly and without anger, that I had stopped a volunteer arrangement I'd been providing for 2 years and 4 months, and that I was no longer available for it. She said it was not a volunteer arrangement, it was family. I said those 2 things were sometimes the same thing, and sometimes they were very different things, and what I had been doing was both, but one of them had stopped being visible to the people I was doing it for. My mother was quiet for a moment, a real quiet, not a gathering breath quiet. Then she said, "Well, Diane is your sister." I said, "I know who Diane is." I said it without heat. I said it the way you state a fact you've known your whole life, and are simply confirming for the record. There was a pause, and then we talked about other things for a few minutes, my uncle's health, the problem with the gutters at the house, and then we got off the phone in the measured way we always do, with no real resolution, and no real rupture either, which is the only mode my family has ever had for difficulty. I stood in my kitchen after that call, and thought about what it would take to feel like that conversation had mattered. I decided it had mattered a little. That was enough. It was Kezia, again, who told me about the shift in the birthday dinner group. For weeks out, she said, Paula had reached out to her a second time. Apparently Diane had been processing what had happened with the people who'd been at that table, and at some point, Paula didn't know exactly when, Diane had quietly said that she might have said something careless that night. Not that she was wrong exactly. Not a full accounting. But that the words out loud, over someone else's dinner table, had not sounded the way she had meant them. Kezia told me this carefully, watching my face. I thought about it. That's something, I said. It is, Kezia said. It was not an apology. It was not a reckoning. But it was Diane standing somewhere near the edge of what she had done and looking at it without completely turning away, and that was more than I had expected inside of a month, so I held it for what it was, and I did not require it to be more. At 6 weeks, I reached out. I texted Diane and asked if she wanted to have coffee. She said yes within 4 minutes, which told me she had been waiting. We met at a small cafe on Hartwell Street, the kind with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu and windows that let in a particular kind of flat morning light that makes everything look a little tired and a little honest at the same time. She came in looking like she had prepared something. We ordered. We sat down. She wrapped both hands around her mug the same way I wrap both hands around mine, and I noticed this, and I thought about how you can share gestures with someone you share blood with, without either of you noticing for 34 years. She said, I'm sorry for what I said at Paula's. I didn't mean it how it sounded. I said, I know you didn't mean it how it sounded, but it was how it sounded that told me the truth about how it was received. She was quiet. I said, I'm not angry at you, Diane, but I'm not going back to the way things were. I'm not available to do that run every day. If you need me sometimes, genuinely sometimes, I can be an aunt to those kids. That's different from being a permanent solution to a structural problem in your schedule. She said, That's fair. She said it like it cost her something, and I let it cost her something. I did not rush to make it easier. That was new. That was the thing I was practicing. There are things I understood about Diane in the weeks after that coffee that I had not understood before, or had understood without knowing what to do with. Diane is not a cruel person. She is a person who grew up in the same house I grew up in and learned a different lesson. I learned that making myself useful was the price of belonging. She learned that belonging was her birthright and utility was something others provided. We learned these lessons from the same people in the same years, and we came out opposite ends. That is not an excuse, but it is an explanation, and I have found that I can hold both of those things at once without either one canceling the other out. She said I didn't have much going on because she genuinely did not see what I had going on. Not because she was calculating or deliberate, because she had never once been asked to see it. And I had spent 34 years not asking. Invisibility is not always imposed from the outside. Sometimes you cooperate with it for so long that you forget you are doing it. And so does everyone around you. Some kindnesses are loans the lender forgets they're keeping. I have thought about that a great deal in the months since. I have thought about how easy it is to give so freely and so consistently that the people receiving it forget a hand extended it. They begin to believe the gift materializes on its own. And when the hand closes, they are not angry that the hand closed. They are confused that the gift is gone, as if the world has malfunctioned. I was that gift for a long time. I materialized every weekday at 3:15. I was as reliable as weather. And weather does not need to be thanked. But I am not weather. I am a person. And knowing the difference between those two things was the work of 34 years, and I will not apologize for finally finishing it. Love that demands you shrink is not love. It is management. I am not interested in being managed. Not by my sister, not by my mother, not by the shape of a family that was built around my willingness to disappear into whatever space they needed filled. Roles can be recast. The first person who needs to know you are done shrinking is you. I know that now. Some mornings I still have to remind myself. I sit at my kitchen table with my Earl Grey tea from the tin with the den on the lid, and Bernard is asleep in the chair across from me, and the copper kettle is just beginning to whistle on the stove, and I feel the old pull. The one that says you should offer, you should help, you are asking too much of yourself by asking for anything at all. I let it speak. I let it say its piece. And then I stay seated. Saying no did not make me cruel. It made me responsible for myself, finally, after a very long time. The cost of keeping the peace in a house, where peace means being the smallest person in the room, is your whole life. I have spent enough of mine. Family is whoever shows up when there is nothing to gain. I know who showed up for me. I know who I will show up for now, going forward, in the life I am rebuilding quietly on Covington Street, with my copper kettle and my appointment book and my cat and my Fridays, which are mine again. If you have ever given something so freely for so long that the people receiving it stop seeing the hand, I want to ask you something. Not to challenge you, just to ask. What would you do if you found out they had never once looked?